So I proposed to them to make a first dialogue on the change or the paradigm of the library from property to streaming, which is, I think, is central for all of us. In fact, our foundation tried to test these kind of approaches back in 2011. And, well, which are the new sales models for in this framework? Please, Johanna.
Yeah. The transformation has been a natural one, in the sense that books will be discovered in whatever medium they come, whether it's parchment or a bound book. And because our society interacts more and more digitally, it was kind of natural that at some point the digital transformation would come into the library world. And it had been there a long time ago, actually, in the academic library world. So the transformation in the public library is more recent. Overdrive has been working with public libraries for the last 13 years. Overdrive created the digital lending platform out of a conversation around 20 years ago between Steve Potash and his wife, who's a librarian, saying, you've spent a lot of time talking to publishers and trying to put books on floppy diskettes, etc., and so forth. Why don't you sit down with my friends, the librarians, and figure out how we could bring this to the library? So that's a little bit where the sort of background of how it came to be. And as users of libraries and as users of digital media grow in different countries, there are countries where the average population has 2 phones, basically, or at least in most places we all have a mobile phone in our pocket. We are interacting more digitally, and it's only natural that it should be reflected in the libraries, I believe. So as a transformation, it will continue to evolve. So we went from digital download to digital streaming, because digital streaming is more practical. It can stream on any device that has a browser. Whereas before we were really looking at being locked down into certain reading devices. Not that many people are using reading devices to interact with books, or audio books for that matter, or other digital media in the library. So that's where we're going, I think. And in terms of business models, maybe we can talk about that in a little moment. I believe those are evolving a lot. I work in Europe mainly, but also South Africa, India, and Israel. And so I see this digital transformation at different stages. I deal with the UK, for example, where the digital transformation happened just a few years after the US. So publishers are a lot more open to e-lending as a business stream for them. But I also work in countries where books are not being digitized yet. And it's that whole process that happened about 10, 13 years ago in the US that I'm seeing over and over again in different instances. So the business models are in constant evolution. There's a constant conversation to be had between publishers and librarians and booksellers. And the technical companies such as Overdrive should be always open to facilitate those conversations, just to make sense of how to manage this balance in the ecosystem of what's happening in bookstores, in libraries, and of course in the publishers' world, with who then they face their authors and agents.
Yeah, from this point of view, I remember when you first came here, the word for us was readers first. Mm-hmm. You remember that?
Yes.
And I think this was a great achievement as a metaphor of what was the kind of problem that libraries were struggling with.
Right, right.
Okay.
I think in general, Johanna brings up some great points that I think are around ebooks, and whether ebooks are the driver of change in libraries. I think it's more to what Johanna was speaking, it's the technology is the driver of change in libraries. From macro view, I think technology is this kind of constant destruction of the old business models, of the old media delivery frameworks that existed, and that churn is so fast and rapid now that I think what ebooks have done is they've really taken this concept that was just natural and historic for a library and used that as a way to bring libraries to the reality that in this new world that is very technologically driven, libraries have to be a part of that. And we have to embrace that change. We have to be experimental in delivery systems, whether it's media or the downloaded book or new types of books. What we call a book may be just an outdated mode or concept. It's not this packaged narrative from end to end. It may just be a chapter or a resource within a book. It may be an interactive experience with a reader where they pick different chapters or listen to the book. But again, technology is this constant kind of destructive force and creative force, always at tension, that the libraries who have historically been at kind of this island of tranquility and stability now have to embrace that change and take a more active role in it. As Luis had said, Readers First was the first attempt at libraries saying, no commercial industry, there's something else we need. We have other problems and we haven't articulated. And instead of leaving it up to the companies like Overdrive to bring us into the 21st century, we now have to get in an active dialogue with them and work collaboratively to both operate in this new world of constant technology change and destruction and creation. And so while it is not necessarily the e-book that is driving and redefining libraries, I think it's technology and the fact that an e-book is a very technologically challenging concept when we dug into it, that it has helped bring libraries to light, to the realization that they have to be active developers in the technology community, active partners with their vendors, with publishers, and with their community to help them kind of not only navigate technology, but embrace new types of service delivery models, be there where the user is, as Johanna had said, with mobile technology being ever present on people. If libraries want to be ever present in your life, we need to be on mobile devices now. Networks, where we can either stream content or we have to be mindful there may not be a network, so we also have to be able to download that content so that they can still have access to this knowledge, information, and culture, whether they're connected or not connected online. So it's, ebooks challenging. Is it driving change? I think it's technology, but it's a kind of a combination, this wild mix of all of it all together.
Yeah, and I think that libraries have a very unique place in our society in the sense that we can get information from all sorts of sources, and in the last few years we've actually been seeing how that information can be poisoned and can be driving political change and things that we as users of technology, we can actually be a little bit herded into certain directions through the use of technology. So the libraries that have always been places where librarians are professionals at providing information, I think that space in our society is essential, actually, in providing a place where professionals of information are going to help us and our children and try to make out what is true, what is false, what is, and in that sense, whether it's a sort of walk into a library and a conversation with one of those friendly librarians who'd say, hey, you like that book? I think you probably like this one. Or another librarian saying to a child, oh, you have to do a project on volcanoes. There's a whole section of book over there that are very, very interesting about volcanoes. To that, even that digital collection where the librarian, through the technology of platforms and things, is able to curate virtual bookshelves on themes that are important to us as a society. I think those are moments that are precious, and libraries have to stay relevant in our society. Otherwise, we lose a framework that keeps us real and sane, I think.
That's a great point. It's one of the things that we talked about early on in our project, which was how do we capture authority? And not authority from the context of being able to control, but authority in trying to determine what content is actually genuine and legitimate. So when we go back into librarianship, we start to see, are we looking at first, original source references? And it's the same with curation and selection. Is this the definitive set of works about Shakespeare, or is this just some modern adaptation commercialized piece? And I think librarians help society navigate that truth of where is actual source information, what is, I shouldn't say qualitatively good content, but legitimate content, or just definitive works around either subject matters or types of experiences or authors. And so I think there's that sense that that's another challenge, and I think with digital is that how do libraries preserve that? I personally think they have an incredible opportunity before them in the worlds of Facebook and fake news, and I said it, fake news, those terms out there, but finding genuine authoritative information to provide society so it's not herded, as Johanna had said, down these paths of, not real world reality.
Yeah, I remember when we invited Fiona Marriott from Luton Public Library in 2009. They were working with you, with Overdrive.
Yes.
And she told us something that we never thought before, that she was facing the problem of these patrons that came from 300 kilometers out from Luton, and just to make, the registration for the library services, and she never see them again. So it's a concept that links to the idea of libraries as a warehouse of content, just like that, which is mainly the idea that we have in this part of Europe. But also I am aware, and we know in this foundation, that in the USA, for instance, and in some parts of Europe, this makes that the librarians tend to change the whole idea of library, or what a library should be. What do you think about that?
I think that's one of the things that we're always asking ourselves in the library. Are we a museum for books, or are we something different in community? And I think libraries have historically looked at themselves, at least in the US, as kind of a bedrock of community. We are the promise of opportunity, so the great American dream. We give unfettered access to knowledge and information, regardless of economic, social class, gender, race, what have you. And because of that, we've also started to take on a different role in giving people equal access to the services that are typically guaranteed by government. So access to knowledge and information databases, computers, so they can file that online job, help them navigate a government form for whether it's Social Security or some type of other government-provided services. Libraries are there to help do that and facilitate that so everyone can both take part in our culture through reading, our services through our government, our political or even, our political conversation or our, just advancement of knowledge through training and education. And I think libraries have started to see that role change and embrace it in many instances. And as you say, what's nice about digital, that person that comes from, you never have met before, that comes from maybe 100 miles away to your library, wants to get access to that resource, you can now stay connected to them through digital. And I think that's a really great opportunity for libraries, how we can use digital to kind of support this new vision of ourselves as a kind of a bedrock within a community, an island and an oasis of tranquility, even in a rough neighborhood or a rough region of the country.
Yeah, I think that the opportunity is amazing because typically the actual library building will welcome mums and dads on Saturday afternoon with their children who want to pass on that passion for reading or discovering books or children's hour, and then you'll have different times of the week where different people will be accessing the library. You'll have the in the UK at least, the library is also, for many families, the only warm place in the winter. So you'll have people actually turning up in the morning to start their job search or look for an opportunity, and very often it's because the heating, they can't afford the heating at home. So that area of sort of oasis in the middle of the community is extremely important. However, it doesn't preclude the library from addressing a larger segment of the population, and this might be, for example, the business population, who will never be able to make it into the library because of opening and closing times. And just to give you an example, the National Library of Singapore, as an institution, has reached out to the government and created a reading initiative saying Read at Work Day. And they've contacted every large multinational that has a headquarter there and said, we've got resources in the library, we've got all these, become a better manager, find out more about blockchain, all these resources basically, and they're attracting the business community to actually use the resources of the public library. It's a way of, I think one of the most important things for a library is to be able to connect as many users in the community, because at some point there is exchange between those people. And that person who starts using a resource from the public library because they've got a presentation to prepare at work may not have gone to the library before and may think, hey, this is actually cool. I can bring my kids there at the weekend or something. And then, again, it becomes a bit like a public space, a public square, where, again, you can rediscover a community life rather than living in a block of luxury flats where there's a guard downstairs. You're actually, it is one of those places where it's in its nature that you will cross paths with people that you may not cross paths with in other situations. So I think that the fact that that person who came in 300 kilometers away but had a reason to use the library and may not walk back in is not necessarily a bad thing, because for every person who doesn't interact on a regular basis with the physical building, there may be 100 others who will be reminded that this is a space that they can use for X, Y, Z reason.
So that's very interesting, because during the previous weeks we were exchanging views on the partnerships of the, possible or likely partnerships between, Overdrive is in between. It's between the publishers, the owners of the content,
Yep.
and the users, in this case, libraries. Do you foresee, do you find any pathway for partnerships between your company and, I don't know, library networks? Or?
Absolutely, yeah. So some of the partnerships that we're looking at, and in a lot of cases, we're not actually necessarily an actor in that partnership, but we're a facilitator.
Oh, that's right.
So one of the large opportunities that we see is we also work with school libraries. And we see an opportunity for schools to have resources that are chosen by teachers, by librarians, by educators in the school for the children. So they can actually say, okay, here's your virtual bookshelf, and these are the books you need to read. So we provide the technology to allow that, but it's the teacher making those decisions. But within that same application, we've worked with public libraries so that the child in that community can access the digital collection of content that is safe for that child's age group in the public library. And that way, the school, teachers, and educators work on the books that they want the child to read, and then the library can provide the books that the child wants to discover. Mm-hmm. That's one example of collaboration that can happen in a community where Overdrive can facilitate it. We see that as a good thing. It's two very important, a school and a public library interacting, which has always been the case. Mm-hmm. But you see the children being brought down by their teachers to the public library once every 2 months or whatever it was in the streets. But this is another way of doing it, because children are using these devices. So if they are going to discover something, it needs to be a book rather than something that's not good for them. In other situations, I see the possibility of even more important partnerships through the use of data. So libraries, publishers, and facilitators like ourselves are sitting on a lot of data. A publisher is always concerned that their books should be represented in the bookstores and in the libraries, because that's the way people will discover authors. The library's mission and the bookshop mission has more similarities than differences. For every passionate reader, you discover books wherever, basically. It's just something natural. You just go to a place. And there is a big opportunity for collaboration, and we've done a few little pilot projects at Overdrive that we're thinking of rolling out more nationally and more globally, in that we've asked librarians to permission to share the data of the books that are very much in demand in the library with the local independent bookstores. So, for example, a library will never be able to completely meet the demand for the bestseller or even the runners-up of the bestseller. So every week, can the library share that with the local bookstore? Very often they're good friends. And they say, of course we can. And the bookstore can actually put out a table and say, hey, why wait? The books are available here. And if you show your library card, you can even get a 10% discount or whatever's allowed, whatever their policy is around that. So, yes, we are all sitting on top of a lot of data, and through data as companies and as business owners and so on, I think we can help each other a lot more in collaborative ways.
Yeah. Very interesting. New York Public Library did a million of wonderful things in terms of partnerships with community and content providers.
Yeah, we've, a lot of times our librarians, as Johanna would say, work closely with our bookstores. So I know they get inspiration from groups like The Strand, which is a very popular small outlet bookstore in New York City, but you know, they're ever present in both communities, and if you just walk by Central Park, they have little kiosks out there to sell books. But I think bookstores and librarians kind of inspire each other around this concept of discovering books, and I think there's a lot of synergy there. Another thing I think that was interesting here from Johanna's point of view is, you know, often at libraries we get into this kind of feeling that there's this opportunity for readers and we're competing with commercial space for it. And I don't think that's necessarily, in listening to Johanna, their perspective. Their perspective is, how do we challenge these very technical issues around trying to connect a reader in one domain, such as a public school, with after-school reading or summer reading programs at the public library, and opportunities and partnerships like Overdrive that can actually bridge that divide for us because they serve both communities is a real interesting and more inspiring and a bigger opportunity, I think, for libraries as we embrace these partnerships with commercial. The challenge on that is, and I'm sure y'all have them with libraries, is there's a big technological gap in capacity at libraries in terms of expertise. And you know, NYPL is very fortunate in that we have a lot of that digital capacity, but it is not present across the US and all the public libraries. And I think the challenge in trying to seize these opportunities for collaboration, whether it's from K through 12 to the public library and reading the lifetime of a reader, and being able to do that in the digital age is going to be challenging to work with libraries. And it's, you know, it's great that we have partners that can not only facilitate that conversation, but actually do that work for us sometimes when we're not able to do that work for ourselves. But I think the thing we have to do is keep a positive perspective on what our relationship is with the commercial industry as libraries, because as partners, not as competitors around this pool of individual readers or users that I think we get into this false competition where it's the battle of eyeballs. You know, that's what, you know, on digital, you have websites always trying to compete for users. We don't need to be that way as a library. I think we need to work with our partnerships to basically just kind of get out of that fight. It's a false fight, and it's really around access. So what is the broadest range of material? How can we always ensure a continuity of service of knowledge, information to our users, whether they're coming in through a bookstore, through elementary school, through their teacher, to the public library in summer after school.
And also having a look at it from I work mostly with the publisher end of the Overdrive business, and it's interesting to see the evolution. So as I was mentioning right at the beginning, we started out 13 years ago, and it was very few publishers who were open to trying this out because they were seeing it as a competing channel for their ebooks. Is this going to cannibalize my ebook sales? So luckily, we've moved along quite a lot from that time. Libraries are not competition to your ebook sales. There is one ebook player in the market who's a competition to, and we'll talk about that maybe in a moment, but basically the libraries are places where your authors and your books will get discovered, and people will go and discover other authors who've written books about the themes that they're interested in, and so on and so forth. So it can only be healthy.
Right.
And on the other hand, there are still a few publishers, not necessarily in the US, but sometimes in Europe, who are just still resisting and saying, it worries me. So of course there are business models that are more or less create these sort of what publishers call friction points, so that it's not too easy, etc. and so forth. But what's really, really important, in my view, in my work with publishers, is to get them to understand that the library is only going to help them get people to not only read their books in the library, but go and buy books at the independent bookstore, etc., and so forth, rather than being, again, and I'll mention the name, when in Amazon, you will get, I'm an avid reader, I read 4 to 5 books a week, and anything that Amazon proposes to me is just completely off.
Right.
And I know that it's their self-publishing or their publishing imprint that they're putting at the top of the search. Whatever algorithm it is, it's not the book by Atlantic Publishing, or it's not the book by Actes Sud, or it's not the book by whoever, the author that I want to discover. So that being churned in that big digital space that's Amazon Prime, this, that, and the other, is, to me, the area that publishers should be looking at, rather than saying, yeah, if someone buys a book, borrows a book in the library, they're not buying a copy. It's never going to be that way. It's never been that way, that you'd rather borrow it because it's free than buy it. There are lots of books that you don't want to buy. But there are books that you're going to borrow that you've read yourself, that you're going to buy because you think, that's such a great book, I'm going to give it to my mum for her birthday. And it'll be interesting.
It's a great point. Last week was the Book Expo of America, and I was actually meeting with one of the other commercial vendors, Biblioteca, and my question was, well, how was the conference for you? And he says, well, the big rumor is libraries are, from Amazon, they're putting out the story that the reason the big 5 publishers in the US, their revenues are going down is because of libraries, and they're cannibalizing your sales. I was like, do you believe that? And he's like, no. He brings down, right on his phone, the author's earnings report, which talks about, which is individually reported from authors, unit sales versus their revenues. And when you're looking at just purely the data, it is the exact opposite. It is literally Amazon, who is this independent publishing platform and their own platform, that is really driving this low-end price point and collapsing the revenue of the big 5 publishers. Yet they have to tell the publishers still sell to me, so blame them on why I'm asking you to drop your prices, and it's the library's fault for doing that. You should stop selling to them, and people can get their books from me, and I'm going to make you sell them literally for free to me. And it's, you know, there's that. It's this strange place where, in the, you know, our partners in the commercial side for public libraries, we are in this battle together to combat that false narrative about public libraries. We really only care about getting discovery of books, not just the low-end books that were published by our imprint, aka Amazon Publishing, which is now a big 5 publisher if you look at revenue. Sorry, Macmillan. They bumped you down one, according to Authors' Earnings Report. It's this strange, we find ourselves in the same battles in this commercial access to ebooks because we're trying to achieve the same thing. Get the publishers' books in front of readers and help them discover those. And don't buy into the false narrative that we are cannibalizing your sales, because even Overdrive has rightly pointed out and provided for years, the data is like, look, people who borrow books from libraries buy more books as well. They read more books in general. Yes, they may get a few free ones from the library, but when they don't want to wait, if they're an avid reader, they're going to go buy from you. And you should have your books in public libraries so they can be discovered and found. But it's an interest, it just reminded me of last week, where our conversation with our commercial partners has really changed from this adversarial tone to this, whoa, how was your conference at Book Expo of America? What's the news? And we're talking at this level now, which is really, really refreshing to me. It's not us versus them. It's really like, how are we going to tackle this market and get those books to people? And that's literally what we focus on today, which is inspiring.
I think that's a great opportunity for collaboration, which is obviously happening because of this situation, but we're in conversations at the moment to pool data from independent bookstores, libraries, and publishers' earning reports to analyze the correlation between discovery of books in bookstores and in libraries, and contrast that to this narrative that's been developed in the US, but we'll hear more about it in Europe little by little. Of, hey, sales of ebooks are diminishing, but loans in libraries keep going up. There is no causation.
Right.
One is not causing the other. It's one company in particular that is using that false sort of premise to put pressure on authors to leave their publishers.
Understood.
Before
we move to the last thread of the conversation, I just remind you that if you want to pose a question to the speakers, you can just raise your hand, and we will provide with a blank paper to write the question down. Okay? And this Amazon, thank you. You are the first one to you just said the name of the company.
I'll say it.
Because sometimes in previous years we kept talking about that without saying the actual,
like Voldemort. You can't
name
say
of the
name.
company. Voldemort. Okay.
I might get into trouble, but I said it.
No. So, linked to the data thing and other things that both of you talked about, I would like to know your views about which would be the trends that are most likely to develop during the next 10 years. We are focused today on the last 10 years. The date, I would say, that is the launching of Kindle for us. We felt that in this institution, we felt that this might change a lot of things in our atmosphere, in our context. So we took this date for this kind of reflection among us. So which are the trends that you foresee for the next 10 years? Who wants to?
I think that it'll be, as we mentioned right at the beginning, it will be at a pace at which technology changes. So we're in the HTML moment. We're in the streaming era. However that evolves, books will evolve with it. And as James mentioned earlier on, the digital books may change their form with some type of interactivity, or there's lots going on there. Is there something that's coming out as a game changer at the moment? I can't really see it. I'm a firm believer that a book is a book is a book, and so it's in many ways the actual devices we'll be using will guide some of those changes. But as we were just talking about earlier on, the main changes are going to be how we use technology as Overdrive, a technology company, how our engineers are going to develop for the AI world. So is Alexa going to be able to borrow a book for you from the library? Yes, of course it is. That part, device and how we interact with devices, is Alexa going to be able to read a book from the library to you? If Amazon let us pass our sort of our APIs and things, yes, it will happen. I think the bigger opportunities are really for the actors in the book world, so publishers, libraries, and booksellers, to work on the data and what it's telling us. That's where the key word is big data. How do we stream all that data? How do we use that data? And how do we use it for good, basically? That's where, for me, the biggest opportunity is at the moment.
And you are in the right position regarding data, for instance.
Yeah. We work with over 40,000 libraries in over 70 countries in the world. So we're sitting on top of a lot of data which we don't consider belongs to us. We consider it belonging to the libraries. So anything that this will come out of this data will be with the library's consent and permission and blessing, and we're creating user groups of librarians and publishers and booksellers and authors. Authors are very central to this. In how do we combat what's going on with big bullying companies or actually big bullying governments as well?
No, I think Johanna's right. It's less. A book is a book is a book, and it's less about how is the book going to change and how do libraries deal with that. It is literally how are libraries going to deal with the information exchange that is required to facilitate the delivery and distribution of books through this ever-changing technological landscape. Data is the key. It is only with data that the machines can do the transactions that make it seamless and effortless to borrow and access information. And I think that, as Johanna was saying, is the real opportunity between public libraries and booksellers and publishers, is how can we make this exchange of data, not necessarily content, but exchange of data to help guide users to your books. We as libraries have challenges. We can't get book covers. Why are they not provided as part of a book sale? Good descriptive, what we call metadata about a book that tells you the description of the book, its classification, its authors, publication. A lot of that information is just kind of an afterthought, but it is essential in digital to have that information, that a common protocol, a common exchange, a common data format that is all about describing the book, not necessarily the book, to exchange that. And that's, I think, I think that's where we're going to see the most transformation and improvement in the coming years. And I think that's also the greatest opportunity for us, so that we can make this, literally make it effortless for users to find publishers' content. It is not going to be a redefinition of the book. As Johanna says, a book is a book. It hasn't changed in many, in decades or centuries.
We'll still be
Just the
walking
medium.
around with a paper book in our bags and
Which is
and
some of the
something on
greatest
our
technology,
phone.
right? I think about it. A paperback book is just incredible technology. It's durable. You can see it in the sunlight at the beach. It's light. It's, it doesn't die of batteries or screen glare or anything like that. So.
I think the e-book and the paper book are not competing with seeing that. A few years ago, it was a debate, and no, it's not going to happen, and it never has happened. It's just the quality of the paper that's changed from papyrus to to screens, but you can still find papyrus if you feel like writing a parchment today. So it's like,
And libraries are a good spot for to find the print books and everything. I think we have no questions. No? Okay, then I thank Johanna and James for breaking the ice. Thank you very much.